If you hear the word trauma, and we hear it a lot nowadays in podcasts, on YouTube, on social media, what is your definition of trauma?
My definition of trauma is, and I think the word trauma is sometimes a bit misused or overused, but trauma for me is wound. And that's the tricky part. A lot of times when we think of trauma, I think that's the important part. A lot of people immediately feel like, oh, that's not me, and feel like, wow, totally separated from that word, because it stands for a lot of people still in that classical form of trauma is the car accident, the war, the combat, the, let's say, soldier with PTSD. That's what a lot of people associate with the word trauma. But for me, personally, trauma is invisible wounds. Anything that overwhelmed at some point in your life, your mind and or your body, and was just too much to handle in that moment. And that can be sometimes even mom and dad fighting at home all the time, and a kid being scared and overwhelmed, not knowing how to handle it, or the absence and the lack of love. This can create also invisible wounds and these chronic stressors, chronic traumas that we often live with. And I think that's why a lot of people resonate also with my content, because for me, trauma, and that maybe we talk about this probably later, shows up in the way we cope, and therefore also in the way we behave in adulthood.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that there's also a lot of people that, because you just said like that many people maybe don't think they have like a trauma. I also think there's many people that say like things like, oh, other people have it like way worse, or it's not that bad. What do you think most people get still wrong about trauma?
I think that's already a response in itself. When we say, well, other people had it worse, yes, that might be true on the outside, but the reality is of these invisible wounds that we don't see. And that's often the struggle we basically also need trying to solve, or we deal with within ourselves. That can feel exactly the same way as someone who's been in a war zone. We cannot, and that's the thing, our brain and our entire system cannot differentiate between, is it now, that's my personal take, is it a big T, a small T? Is it the family dynamic that is where you feel unsafe, or is it the environment outside of your home that you feel unsafe in? The common denominator for me is you feel a level of unsafety. And that is trauma in itself. That's a huge stress factor. And again, we cannot, and that's where I think we got it wrong. Your personal experience, and if you're struggling and you feel like you carry these invisible wounds, they're just as valid as someone else's traumas, and they're maybe even more visible to the outside world.
You said for the second time already, like invisible wounds and like invisible, like subtle forms of trauma. Why is it so difficult for us, why is it so easy for us to overlook those kind of invisible wounds?
Because the interesting part is, and that's a personal observation that I did in my work as a psychologist, we're very easily dismissing our own feelings, our own experience. We can hold a lot of empathy for other people in our life. We give great advice to friends, family members, people we care about. But when it comes to ourselves, we often have exactly that mindset that you even said, like, oh, other people have it worse. We feel like a burden. We feel like it's too much if we shared how we really felt. These are these invisible wounds that I find so important to emphasize on. And that's also when you look into my content, people can relate, because again, it shows up at a certain way how you cope with these feelings of inadequacy, unworthiness, that fear of being alone. We're a lot of times fear-based, but it comes from within. And that's a wound in itself.
How does trauma show up before we even kind of like recognize that it is trauma? Like, what are the kind of common denominators that you identified?
Most of the time, it shows up in a way, of course, we try to cope with it. So a lot of times we are exposed to trauma, or we live with trauma, we live with the wounds, with stress, and we cope. That's just a normal thing, how we would call it. Survival mode, where we're just stuck in. We can be in it for years. If we talk about childhood trauma, this is the way we know ourselves. But the thing with trauma is a lot of times, all these wounds, the way we cope is a survival and a protection mechanism. But because of the repetition of it, it becomes part of our personality. And so quickly we say, I'm just anxious. I've always been anxious. Or we hide away when we're feeling we're like too much for someone, or we avoid confrontation, and we just say like, that's just me and how I am. But it started somewhere else, and that's trauma, that's the wounds, and shows up later. And the struggle most of the time shows up, from my take, between your late 20s onwards. Obviously there's no open ending, but because we try to cope so much, eventually we run into a physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion because of that attempt trying to cope with it, hide away from it, maybe suppress or avoid even how we really feel.
What I find quite interesting is that a lot of times like trauma starts like in the early 20s, as you said. Why do you think it starts at this time in our life?
I think we recognize it maybe more in our 20s. I think the trauma had started way earlier, but when we are children or teenagers, we have also a level of dependency. It's also your brain is still forming, developing. So is your personality, of course, from a young age. These formative years are there for a reason. And we have a level of dependency onto like our family, the people and environment. For a teenager, the present moment, the friends, they matter. We want to belong. We have also a sense of belonging, of course. So we would do and sacrifice a lot of times out of survival, out of the trauma responses, our own self to an extent. That doesn't mean physically, but sometimes emotionally. That means I allow people to overstep my boundaries. I don't have any, because we also live in family dynamics. And when we grow older, we create, also naturally, we leave the nest in some ways, but we also create a form of distance, can reflect back, but also we become more, as a natural human being thing, we start comparing. We are listening into other people's lives. And if you, for example, meet a girlfriend or a partner, you dive into their past and their upbringing, and you naturally, that's what we do as human beings, we reference back into our own childhood. And then there's other ways, of course, life. There's career, there's university, schooling, work, whatever it is, you name it. We get confronted with other people, triggers show up. In relationship, work, in any shape and form. So perfectionism, for example, is a way of coping, of like, I have to constantly give my all best. But how long can you do that? You can maybe try to get good grades in school, become, let's say, very good in performing and in hobbies, or and so on and so forth. But you're still human eventually. And I struggle with the word burnout, but I really think it defines it quite well. You burn out. You're exhausted. And that's how trauma shows up. It shows up in these spikes of anxiety that can be random. For others, it's panic attacks, phases of depression, and you're really not sure where it comes from. That shows up most of the time in your late 20s, mid-30s, because you've tried to cope for a very long time. And there's only a point of coping, and then it's enough. Too much to handle for one person.
I think that there's a lot of responses, like trauma responses, like, for example, fight or flight, that people are kind of like very aware of, right? Because I think they have quite a good marketing agency, those two trauma responses. So many people talk about it, but I think there's so many different trauma responses. What is the first step in identifying that you have a response to something?
The identifying is one of the hardest things to do, because it requires a level of understanding, that's information, but also self-awareness about how you're actually failing. But you can notice it in certain patterns. Like, for example, if you constantly find yourself anxious, sometimes overreacting, that means emotionally dysregulated, angry towards a person, or looping in your mind, overthinking, being resentful towards others. Often relationships show you also your triggers. You will feel that. You notice and you see the pattern. So looking inward is like, how am I really doing? Am I happy in my life? Are there things that are repetitively happening in my life? Is there a way of thinking? Am I thinking back into memories of my past? Is there a way of flashbacks? Flashbacks can be emotional. They can be vivid, of really thinking memories of your past. They can also make you feel that way, anxiety, anger. helplessness, powerlessness. If that shows up somewhere in your life, it's worth looking a little bit more in depth.
What do you think is the most underrated or maybe most overlooked trauma response?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many different trauma responses, but we cannot single them out. I think that's also a thing. If you have a, let's say, perfectionistic eye and you're constantly, let's say, rearranging things, that can also stem from something else. It's more like, is there an accumulation of quote unquote trauma responses? And it's also very important to look into, what is actually trauma? And again, that's the emotional wound. How was my childhood? How's the relationship with my parents? How's the relationship with my siblings? Only you as an individual, or if you watch this, you know the answer. You can create that bird view, that self-awareness of, okay, what is actually trauma? I think that's important. But am I having, let's say, difficulties in these relationships? And that's, I think, the most challenging. So there's not one thing that's the most overlooked. I think it's for you finding first the bird view of like, what is my trauma? And if you ask me, I think a lot of people have trauma. That doesn't necessarily mean it's negative in your life. It's more like, does it impact your life in a level of that you're not fully yourself, that you're not your authentic self, that you're not fully fulfilled, happy? Do you feel your life is black and white? And would you like to live it more colorful?
What I almost cannot believe, if people had like an insane trauma in their life, a really crazy experience, and they just don't know it or forget about it for so many years. Can you explain that, kind of like unravel this? Like, why does our brain kind of like wire us this way, that like we have a really traumatic experience and then we just kind of erase it completely from our mind?
Your brain is almost like your best friend and your protector, particularly obviously in these moments. It's there and it shields you from things that are too much, too overwhelming, maybe too painful, too difficult, basically too hard to even bring logic into it. And this is a form of disassociation. So when you are living, let's say, let's go with one major event, when you experience that, people really almost experience have this out of body experience. They sometimes even see themselves from above. That's disassociating. That is like, I'm physically maybe in so much pain, or it's so difficult, or so many boundaries have been crossed. That's what physical trauma does a lot of times, that I need to make a step back. And your brain does the best way it can cope with it. Is like, let's erase it. Let's basically mark it black, the entire face, whatever happened. The problem is your body will not forget. Your body will always remember. And that's where people struggle a lot. They're like, oh my God, I have no idea what my childhood was like. I have no memories of things. They can see pictures of themselves and they're like, I don't know if it was there. I really don't know. They've lived a lot of times long phases of their life in constant disassociation, and therefore memory forming was not possible. It's really a survival brain constantly switched on. We don't hold the memories, no time, basically. That's the reality of like, if you're in survival mode, running, even if a lion would chase you, what do you need memories for? You just need to run. And you need only the parts of your brain that get you running and basically hide or find safety. That's what you need. Then you need your muscles, and you also don't need to eat. So let's, from a body perspective, you don't need to digest now. You just need to be full on activated, full on cortisol, adrenaline, go. But a lifelong like this is really too much for your body. But that's where the memory forming is. Like you lived a life in survival mode. You don't hold memories, and your brain does what it can. Basically, no memories, and your body remembers through triggers. That's why you sometimes have physical triggers. That's emotional flashbacks. It can be simply a conversation with someone, and their tone of the voice reminds you of trauma, or a smell, or a sort of dynamic that recalls for your body something that you didn't want to recall, and you're back in your emotional flashback.
And this is what you mean when you say that basically the mind forgets, but the body doesn't forget, right?
Yeah, body, when I talk about body, is your nervous system. your nervous system runs through your entire body and is basically divided into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the one that basically gets you activated. We need that also to go through the day, to sometimes go into a meeting, basically to handle also stress. So it's helpful, gets you going, keeps you active throughout the day. The parasympathetic nervous system is the one for rest, digest, and good sleep. But often, trauma creates a dysregulation in the nervous system. So you're stuck most of the time in one of those modes. Fight, flight, freeze is parasympathetic on. So it's like gas, brake. A healthy balance, a healthy nervous system would be able to travel and go through both of them in a regular sort of day. Sometimes you can rest, you can down. So if you sit with me right now, maybe you feel more activated, but afterwards we switch off the cameras, you have a cup of tea, you calm down a bit. Or at least in the evening when you want to go sleep, parasympathetic nervous system switches on, you go through the cycles of sleep, and tomorrow when you get up, you start your day, you go back into sympathetic, go into your work, and it's a nice balance. But for people stuck, particularly with trauma, they're stuck in one and they can never get out of it. So everything feels urgent. They're stuck in hypervigilance. That means scanning the room, reading the room, overthinking, overanalyzing, reading your facial expression. That's why they get overwhelmed in social settings. It's like, oh my God, they feel literally out of control and way too exposed. They feel judged a lot of times, totally helpless in so many ways. But this is just, again, a whole kind of thing. It never stops. It's a loop. And in the evening, you want to fall asleep. You're thinking, overthinking what happened yesterday. What did you say? Or your to-do list of tomorrow. But all of those things basically keep you here in that familiar, where we've created our whole personality around, that survival mode. Stuck there, constantly on, doing things, being productive, and so on, until you basically cannot go on anymore. And that's what a lot of people then call rock bottom, mental breakdown, exhaustion, burnout, you name it.
And how do those people then like unforget in a way? Is it possible that there's people that live with lifelong trauma and never unpack it? Or like what kind of needs to happen for it to come basically to the surface? Is it then like rock bottom only, or is there other ways to...
I hope not that it's rock bottom, but the reality of it is a lot of time. And I think that's a bit of the human experience. I hope that's going to change, of course, with a lot of more awareness around it. But a lot of times we are so used to who we are and suffering in those trauma loops. So we suffer until we cannot go on anymore. It's a very natural experience, I would say. A lot of people only, unfortunately, let's say, go and do the work, change or heal, however you want to call it, when there is a real sense of urgency or that need. A lot of times we really wait for rock bottom. Everyone has a different definition of it, but the pain needs to be great enough for us as humans a lot of times to make the change. Because being in what's familiar, even if it's uncomfortable, we often stay in it. It's very natural that we stay in our familiar. And that's a very difficult one that I'm saying, because sometimes when some people watch and listen, they know also that they have trauma, and they maybe feel like reluctant still to change, because truth is we are sometimes so familiar with pain, with stress, and the trauma that we only know ourselves that way. And it would mean almost creating not a new personality, but stepping out of what we know and walking into the unknown and becoming someone else. Not really, but in a way of like, I don't know what's going to happen. That is something that people struggle with. So they rather stay in what they're familiar with. And then they cope with the stress, the exhaustion, and trying to, and not everyone reaches rock bottom also.
What do you think is kind of like the first step for people, maybe to also make this practical for someone listening, to kind of like identify if you have like trauma? Like, is this difficult to do? I mean, of course, probably it's like a one-on-one session with you. But like, just sometimes, like, if you want to check in with yourself, like, what are the things that you can do to kind of question things, or like hold a mirror in front of you maybe a little bit?
To be honest with you, the best thing is find something external, and it doesn't need to be necessarily a person, but information and self-awareness is key. And sitting with yourself and thinking about it means you're sitting with yourself and with your own thoughts, and your own thoughts are not always your greatest advisor. So looking into free content of people, going on YouTube, hopping into my account, checking in like, okay, what is actually trauma? What are these trauma responses? How do they look like in daily life? I think that's important. If you identify yourself with, let's say, a few videos, you're like, oh God, is that me? Nothing wrong. That means just maybe it's worthwhile and you are worth it to look into it if there's something that you would like to change, heal, or work on. Yeah, that's what I would say. Go and find something, a platform, someone who is a bit of the expert. Talk to them, get free consultations or free content out there, and just see, does that make sense to you? Is that something that you see happening in your own life?
I also want to dive a little bit into your own personal story. Was there like a point where you said, I want to specialize in trauma therapy? Or did you say like, I'm going to specialize in trauma therapy because I'm a trauma survivor? Like a little bit the chicken and egg story.
That's a very good question. I have to go and roll back a little bit. I come from the emergency section in psychiatry. So I've been working there for a very long time. That meant working with people in crisis moments was already always my work. That meant I worked with people who had a lot of traumas in their life. I've literally spoken to people from different facets, different countries, cultures. They all had one thing in common. It was trauma, and their responses were very similar. And you see a lot when you work in hospitals, in clinics, in the emergency ward. You spend 18 hours plus a day there. And I noticed the patterns. So it became for me, and I'm a psychologist, obviously, like every psychologist, we start talking, we love talking, we love listening. But in my work, guiding people from the emergency section basically out into life again. That's the aim of my work, that they can live a life again and be happy and feel fulfilled and don't feel also suicidal or struggling. I came very quickly to the point of talking about it is not helping them. It doesn't, it created barriers, it created walls. And I think it's, at least how I felt, my level of curiosity and that need of wanting to help them. What else can I do? So that was the very first step. What else can I do? So I immediately tried to do more holistic work, got curious, tried to collaborate in a way of interdisciplinary work. The mind-body connection became very clear to me very early on. So that already something that, of course, started my journey. And I have my own work, my own fair share of trauma, which I would never hide. I think it's also important that I'm honest and transparent. And yes, I said that very clear to myself when I had my own traumas and I hit my own literally rock bottom. I made that promise of like, if you ever find a way out of feeling this way, I mean, first of all, I could for the very first time, and I don't wish that on any psychologist or coach out there, that could relate to the people that I helped with, what it feels like not wanting to continue life the way that you've been living, not seeing a future, all of those feelings that also create a deep sense of fear and you feel lost in your own identity. Talking about it is not going to do the answer. It doesn't help with PTSD, the anxiety, the panic, the distrust, the fear of unsafety, that physical experience that anyone who has ever had anxiety can probably relate to. And I said, if I find a way out, of course, I'm going to help anyone else because I know how it feels like. And that's how it became so natural to me, based on my own story, but also based on what I've been doing before, that helping people out of crisis, out of these moments, as fast and as efficient as I can became my go-to thing. And my passion. It's my passion, purpose. And I think for everyone who's really good at what they're doing, it comes from a personal experience, having lived through it. That's how I see it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think it's also really nice that you came out of it and that you're helping now so many people. Was it for you? I mean, I'm just wondering, and if this question goes too far, let me know. Because you were sitting on the other side, right? Like you've seen like endless like cases, maybe similar to your case. But is it like when you live it yourself that you just sometimes don't want it to be true, or that you cannot see the signs that you maybe now tell other people to say like, look, those are like early signs, or those are signs from like trauma? Is it difficult if it's for yourself?
Yeah, it is very difficult to, and the reality is of being honest with yourself is sometimes one of the hardest things, of seeing things for what they are. Personally speaking, self-doubt was my next go-to thing. So I doubted everything, including myself. And that's what a lot of people with trauma also struggle with. They doubt. They're, like you even said at the beginning of it, yeah, but other people have it worse. Or that sort of feeling of like, well, but I don't have trauma. It really doesn't justify it. Or they make excuses for others. Can be the abuser, or can be, situations. They take on the responsibility for a lot of things. But that in itself is already trauma. So becoming real with yourself and looking into all parts, that means also I heard someone say shadow sides. It's difficult. It's painful also. And yeah, that's not the easiest thing to do, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and also especially when you are like a psychologist, right? Like you probably say like to yourself, like, oh, that cannot happen to me because like I'm like I would recognize it, and I could do it, I could solve it for myself. And it's not always so easy like to recognize, I think, when you are in this situation, because I think that a lot of trauma also comes like very slowly, right? It just, I mean, there's like those one-time traumas, like accidents or like something like really crazy, but they can also be just like trauma over years of a relationship, over years of living in a household.
Yes, I think there's also a lot of studies around it. It takes people who, for example, are in abusive relationships, at least between 6 or 7 years on average. And I think I want to really emphasize on average, to find out and to pull the plug and maybe leave. Obviously, we have to also look into why. Because if abuse would be, or let's say a psychologist, a psychological abuse would be so obvious, then no one would take it. But it's subtle. It starts small. It becomes that one-time joke. You can say it about myself. It's like, it was always my achievements were a little bit belittled. You can laugh with the person. Eventually it becomes more. It adds up. There's this highs and lows. It becomes confusing. It's loving. It's painful. It's exactly that part that keeps you also stuck in it. And you lose yourself in it. You lose yourself in loops of self-doubt, being stressed, taking on the emotional responsibility for the relationship. So this is not something, again, that is just a one-time thing, and the people, the abuser is always just bad. Then you would probably find easier a point out. But it's because it's so mixed, so confusing, and you're right in it. And it's often not how it matches up with the external, that means your environment, gets a total different picture presented, that you're thinking, is it me? Maybe I'm doing something wrong. If I just worked harder, if I changed something. So that's the loop that you stay in. So abuse, no matter what it is, or trauma, is not that one-time event, that car accident, we can pinpoint it down. That was that day, that time, that when it happened. That's also bad, of course. But with the chronic traumas, and that's also what complex PTSD is, it's
micro moments,
a lifelong. A parent that you grew up with, you don't know the parent any other way. You don't know yourself any other way. That's your normal. No matter how painful you grow up, that's what you reference to
be normal.
It's normal.
Yeah.
That's it. It's so this is the reality of it. Or the classical homes. We both come from Germany. Not wanting to generalize the Germans, but there's often a very, at least from my take, a normal dynamic that a lot of people in that generation lived. The father very dominant, the mother maybe a stay-at-home mother, rather empathetic, anxious. But the dynamic creates for the child at home, if it's not a loving dynamic and there's friction at home, it's very destabilizing for a child growing up, but it's their normal. The dominant father, maybe emotionally not very regulated, rather harsh in his language, emotionally unavailable, a mother very much anxious. What is the message to the child? It creates, again, these over-empathetic children that then we call now, I hate that label, people pleasers. They had to be. They had to be fawning to the father, to the person who was most unsafest. The mother maybe a bit more the flag in the wind, unpredictable. That's for kids, unsafety. And that's why so many people can relate to invisible wounds and those behaviors that show up in my content through stress cleaning, through the people pleasing, to being tongue-tied around authority people, not creating your boundaries, not expressing yourself fully. Because a lot of people grew up in similar dynamics. And it's just one example out of many.
Why do you hate the term people pleaser so much?
Because it creates a negative label onto a person. I'm not a label fan in general, but people pleaser sounds like you had a choice. It's like, yeah, but you're a people pleaser. No, we have to look into what it really is. And everyone who can identify as a quote-unquote people pleaser might relate. It's not that you choose it. You feel you have no choice. That's helplessness, powerlessness, and it's best, again, because you learned someone else had to be happy, and you sacrificed your own happiness, your own boundaries, your own self to keep that person safe for you. That's fawning. I prefer the fawn response over people-pleasing because fawning was something that you had to do in order, and that's important, to survive. And survive sounds very rough, but survive means also that you are existing and belonging to a family dynamic.
And functioning inside of the dynamic. Yeah.
Yes.
Really interesting. I think that, with social media, like, I think it's so easy, like the labels, right? Because of course they click a lot.
Yeah.
But then when you look a level deeper, then there's much more behind that.
Yeah.
Just quickly, maybe also coming back to you still, what was the moment then for you, like that you decided to pull the plug? Was there a specific moment, or was it also like a process?
It was definitely a process, but also a moment. The moment was for me very painful, but clear. I could not go on. The amount of panic attacks, anxiety attacks, the loss of your entire identity in it is so painful and profound that you literally, for me, it was a point of like, it's me stepping away, but also for the sake of my own child. He needs a mother, or there's no me anymore. It was very clear. It was very black and white for me in that moment. It's living, unliving. It was impossible to go on a day longer. Physically, mentally, anyone who can relate with trauma knows also that there's a physical element. I had literally a slip disc. My teeth literally fell out, broke. I had rashes all over, blurry vision, anxiety, panic. My body did things that I could never even explain to someone until I had literally seen it myself, of course, and no one would ever believe it, what went wrong with my body. But that stress to such a high extent for way too long that, you feel like you're falling apart.
That's crazy. Would you say that kind of your son is like one of the reasons that kind of like also pushed you over this limit of let's say pulling the plug in that sense?
I think, again, that's very personal, and I can only compared to the people that I've helped in my life. But the story often is exactly like this. When you're at this point of, I'm so not just exhausted, it's like you're questioning at this point everything, your entire existence, and you have nothing else to hold on to. And then you go into like what's actually worth living, because life is, you're living inside of yourself in a hell. And I think that's what people underestimate, when what trauma can do to you. It can look wonderful to the outside. You can still look like you've made your hair, you're dressed nicely, you have a smile on your face. People with depression can smile. People with anxiety can smile. That's for me also trauma. People with trauma can smile because they don't want to burden others. That's they live in hell with themselves, and I lived like that. I lived a personal hell, and no one knew what was going on, because shame is the one that brings up that mask. And then the only thing is, what's worth living for? Why would I stay? Why would I continue living one day longer in this internal hell, feeling absolutely helpless, powerless, in pain, lonely, you name it. And then it narrows it down to, what's the most important thing to you? And it was for me, my son. I did not want to be a mother abandoning my own child. I love my son deeply, and he was the only driver and the only reason why I'm still here.
Wow, that's beautiful. Is this kind of like shame? Is this like a typical like response, or like maybe not response, but like, is shame holding real healing back a lot of times?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think trauma can be a lot of things, right? But shame is one of the most difficult responses to it, because shame means something is wrong with you. It compares you to others. It makes you feel not good enough, inadequate. It gives you also a feel of, some people would say that also, I feel stained, dirty. I feel like that broken sort of piece in the shelf, and that's really what shame does to you. And shame goes always very much, they're almost best friends as a trauma response, hand in hand with the harsh inner critic, and that reconfirms that shame over and over and over. It's your inner thought process, how you view yourself. It becomes very harsh towards you, beats you up, shames you actually more. And that shame doesn't just isolate you, makes you feel lonely, but it also holds you back of being vulnerable and speaking up. That's what you see also in a lot of times in let's say sexually abused victims. They hold, and it's common theme, shame. They don't speak up because it's very much fuels their shame about themselves. And that's what all people, or let's say most people, don't want to generalize it, that I've worked with. They hold all a level of shame and inadequacy and unworthiness within themselves. And that's the lesson trauma had taught you. But you can change and heal that. And I think that's the most important message that I want to bring. Being vulnerable, speaking up, and that's what I hope, love also, that's what your podcast does. Normalizing to talk about these wounds. We all hold some to some extent, some more than others. But let's talk about it, and don't shame each other for it, or don't belittle, and don't make it, minimize the wounds around people.
Yeah, I find this so interesting that shame is such a difficult emotion also, I think, to grasp. Like, I mean, in your personal life and business life, so sometimes like we just tell each other, or tell ourselves, like, it's like, oh, if I don't do this, or what would people think about me, and all those kind of like responses that then go through your mind, and like, oh, then I'm failing, and then I'm a failure, and then I'm everyone will see me like this. It's really crazy that for humans it's so important to kind of be seen by others so many times, which I find really interesting, that it's so important that it's so important what other people think about us. And I would really like to know why this is this way, but it's very, very difficult probably to describe. Or I don't know if is there like a certain like psychological response or a response in the brain why this
I can
happens.
bring only my own take on it, because when I think of it, it's like we are all humans, and humans are designed or made also to connect. We lived together in tribes, in communities, in villages, in order also to feel safe, protect each other. We want to connect. That's our natural instinct also, to connect, to belong. And you also said an important word, to be seen. So it's normal. But there's also a society, sort of a societal factor in it, that we're overly caring also, often at this point, what other people think of us. And that creates all again a fear and out of control moment, because I don't know what you think of me. And if I don't know, maybe I'm trying to be extra nice so that I receive a certain feedback from you. And if it's a smile or even, say, hey, I really like you, that eased me. It made me feel like, okay, I can calm down. And that goes back again to trauma. And let's go into the people pleasing, into the fawning again. People like that have been living their whole life on craving feedback from the outside world, into looking into, how is he feeling? How's she feeling? How's mom, dad feeling? How is the unsafe person in my family feeling? Because if I keep that person happy, I can be safe. And that's the problem. It's constantly a loop. But if it continues like this, in school, we are trained to be getting good grades. It's also external feedback. We need to belong into groups. It's external feedback. You should. These are all externalized things. Social media is not necessarily helping. So we are very much focused on what other people think. Do I get the likes, the thumbs up? Does the messages then, therefore I am good, I'm better. Again, we compare. And that's where I am saying, I get it, we all need to belong, connect. But the first connection, and that's where we got it wrong, has to start here. You need to start and connect with yourself first. The first relationship, of course, you have your family, and that's your first love, and how you are taught to love. And when you're a bit older, and that's what we can do, what teenagers can do already, is like learning to connect with themselves. Find self-love, build that foundation within yourself first. It's like building a house. Can't just start with a roof. Gotta start the foundation. Self-love, compassion, care, understanding yourself. And from there onwards, then you come from a grounded, more knowing who you really are, feel connected, and then external feedback is just a nice add-on to things. Yes, we all do need that, but it doesn't define you or change the core of you or what you believe to be true about yourself.
How do we teach the future children those kind of principles? Because if you look at how life is set up, right? Like in general, it's all about measuring, it's all about comparing, it's all about grades, it's all about performance. And it starts like once they go to school, right? They get grades for everything. Then there's a class average, and then you're below and you're above. You go to like this school or that school, depending on like your performance. You get this or that job, depending on so everything is like our whole life is then determined by how much we earn, how much, what performance we brought in school. That gives us a degree, so you can spin that whole rabbit hole to the end of our days. How do we break this, that we teach children like the self-awareness, the self-love, the self-care, without breaking them with all the pressure that they have with social media, with school, with measurement, with performance, with grades?
My personal take is I would love it if there was a subject that teaches you the language from within. It's a new language. It's a language that I also teach, for example, in my course. It's the language of your nervous system. It's rather simple, but yet so difficult, because we're, again, so used to the external and not looking inward. So subjects like, they do it in, I think, Denmark or one of the Scandinavian countries, empathy class, emotional regulation class, these sort of things, these inward practices that check in with yourself. How are you feeling? What's going on? What's empathy? Feeling your feelings, understanding this world. It can be one simple subject in school, but it's a practice that we need to learn. We're not born with it. We need to practice it consistently, and then we have a total different world, I would say.
Yeah,
not externalized, not that me thinking, elbow thinking, a more kinder world, I would even believe.
Yeah, you also create a lot of content online, which gets like a lot of positive resonance from many people. You grew like insane followings on several platforms. So kind of like this whole topic of trauma becomes also like a little bit more pop culture relevant, I think. Is this always a blessing or also a curse?
Getting the followers or the pop culture?
That kind of trauma becomes like so, let's say maybe easy to diagnose. I think, there's people that online, they see something, this is so me, or okay, now I know I have this trauma response, or now I know I have this trauma, and probably this is because of that and that. While this is really good, I think, to open up this conversation, but also I think it's sometimes can be dangerous as well, right?
It depends. I mean, the thing is, trauma, again, is that one word that at the beginning is like, oh, it feels heavy, it's a lot. If we rephrased it into wounds, then we all would have some of the wounds. And I think that's the thing with the invisible wounds that I'm trying to bring across, that new word. Invisible wounds we all hold, and quite frankly, of course, they're also a bit part of life. The loss of someone, for example, a parent when they're old, is the cycle of life or the circle of life, but it's also traumatic. It's painful. It creates a wound because the absence of a person that you loved and cared about. These wounds and traumas are part of life, but I think one element is missing. We have not, and that's why I want to emphasize on schools or also your own work as an adult. We have not been taught how to really deal with wounds. And wounds means grieving, self-awareness, self-compassion, understanding, being your own safety net, and your own safety net that we know as a natural response is only our mind. Thinking things through, understanding why things happen is helpful, but it doesn't help you heal these wounds and go into the how-tos. You stay stuck here. And that's where a lot of people are lost. They're like, I know what's going on, I see the trauma, but we need to learn new languages and get new skills and tools to deal with also things that just are part of life, things we couldn't change, they were not in our control. But when we know it, and that's the beautiful part is, once we understand it, we know what to do. We have a tool set, a skill set. We feel empowered within. And once you feel empowered, things happen. And yes, also for me, in my life, difficult things happen. And I know I will have still traumas to come. That's because of life. But I feel okay that I'll be able to handle it because I've been equipped now, and that no one can ever take away from me. And I think that's the most beautiful part. You have that in you. You have it in you. I have it in me. We just need to have the ways and the resources and the skills or the learnings how to access these things that we carry already.
That's really nice. Really nice put. I love that. I also want to talk to you a little bit about healing. I think that's also a very important part of
it's the most important.
not only diagnosing that you have something, but also taking the next step basically. What are the stages that normally people go in kind of like healing emotional wounds that you identified?
The normal stages are a lot of times that they find themselves in something. They're like, ooh, I struggle, or see myself in the content, or it's awareness. Awareness is basically step one. It's like, I have it. Something is going on. I'm not happy in my life, or I'm dealing with anxiety, depression, you name it. And they finally feel, oh my God, yes. That's why also information helps you so much. And talking about trauma is not a lost time. I think we need to also really emphasize on it. That's a critical element of understanding what's going on inside of you, to map out the world within yourself, the wounds, to see it, to really see it. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But that's where a lot of times the work then stops for people, right? And then how to would be, let's dive deeper now, because that's where the real work actually starts. Self-awareness is step one, and then it goes into the uncomfortableness of, let's feel your feelings. Let's tap into them. Let's process the feelings. Let's do the, and that's very individual, inner child work, the reparenting work, to dig up these emotions, process, integrate them. And that's nervous system work. That's also neuroplasticity work of like changing the way that you thought about yourself, other people. And it's not just challenging your mind, it's also the trauma processing work. So that's really the heavy emotional lifting work that needs to take place in order to heal, from my personal experience.
And where do you think most people get stuck the most?
In intellectualizing. You can think through your feelings. You can think about your emotions. You can stay stuck, and there's a safety net that your mind has created on your body in order to cope with whatever you had dealt with. They're stuck in self-awareness and overthinking and overanalyzing and intellectualizing their wounds. And that's where the most frustrating and most friction lies. Like for them, it's like, but I've done the work. I've talked now about it. I see it happening. They see it happening in their relationships. They see, oh my God, I keep on, falling for the same kind of woman, guy. I keep on being unhappy. They live with resentment. You name it. They see it. They also know where it comes from, but nothing is changing. That's the most difficult part, where a lot of people are stuck. Because here's the moment where you would walk into the unknown, and that's the uncomfortableness, and that's very much also fear-based, because letting go, and it's not that simple, let just go of things, but it defines a little bit the work. Letting go of or shedding your past self and stepping into your new self that was always there, the version before your trauma, and connecting with that one means you might just see things differently about yourself, but also the relationships you're in. Things are changing, and we're naturally not really big fans of change because it requires us a lot of conscious work, a lot of habit changes that requires a lot of energy to put in. And when it comes to personal healing, development, no one sees the result, particularly in the beginning, except you. And there you need to hold enough love and care for yourself, either that, or, and that's the uncomfortable truth, have enough suffering in order to really do and go into the, now I'm really moving and changing things.
And what do you think is the part of healing that hurts the most?
The part of healing hurts the most. You're grieving. You're also grieving a life maybe that you did not have, or you could not have, or a future that will look differently. You're grieving also parts of yourself, of course. So the grieving part, which comes with difficult emotions, anger, sadness, resentment, overwhelm. These are the very difficult parts that I would say they take also a lot of energy from you. So healing is not, it's like a workout, but harder because it brings up emotions. And they're not nice to face sometimes. They're parts of ourselves also that we don't want to look into. The shadow sides, the things that we sometimes had to do also in survival. There's also parts where we play a role. And these are difficult moments to look into, to face your real and true self.
Can you heal alone?
I struggle with this one, and it's not because I want to, help you. I want to help you, but it's not that I have to be the one. But in all honesty, in the beginning, I think you need someone to help you with it. And simply, and that's my professional and personal take, how I see it is because you only know yourself, the way you're feeling, the way you're thinking, the way you're behaving, and challenging that, and that's part of the work also. You're challenging the way you think. You're challenging your inner critic. You're basically taming that inner critic, that shame, all of those things that trauma also brings up in you. Trauma also makes you believe certain things about yourself, that you generally feel, for example, not good enough, unworthy. That comes with a set of not just emotions, but also physical feelings, anxiety, whatever. Challenging all of this when you actually feel it, and feeling means when you're hurt, you believe, for example, when you touch, let's say, a hot stove. Yep, I now believe that the hot stove hurts me. We created a belief, let's say, about that hot stove. We both now touched it. We're like, Jesus, that did hurt. Never gonna touch it again. It's a takeaway. But it's the same with trauma. So challenging things and, let's say, creating other feelings, because when you're deep in the trauma, in the survival, everything is bad. You see also, and there's the proof, bad things keep on happening to you. Other people are like, yeah, Murphy's Law keeps on, everything times bad things happen to me. It's in your moment absolutely true. You see it, you feel it, and you experience it internally. Challenging all of those things within yourself is very hard. You need someone else sometimes by your side just to challenge it, to help you, support you. But also you need a rock in this moment and someone who maybe helps you step out of what you know. And that's what the beautiful part is, at least what I believe is of a good psychologist, a good coach. Anyone who can help you in whatever you're looking for. Find someone who's done the work and allow them just to jump in. Let them on your boat. You're still the captain, but let them guide you into different waters. If you've never felt the sun and you've always felt the rain, that's what trauma is. Allow someone who saw the sun, who knows maybe the way, to bring you there, and you feel once the sun yourself. You've created a new belief, a small one, of like, yes, it's possible. It felt great. I love this sun so much. I want to do it again. And eventually, and that's a beautiful part, and I think that's also the work of a good therapist, coach, you name it, that they help you and empower you, that you eventually have the map yourself, that you don't need them anymore, that you can go on and find the sun. Yes, you can navigate rain, but you also know eventually I will find the sun again. And that's empowerment, and that's healing. Also, no, amazing. You cannot do it alone.
Yeah, but I think that's really important, right? I think there's many people out there that think they can probably, maybe, I read a psychology book, but I think it all happens, it's still in their own world, right? In their own belief system that they seem to be like as normal. But then the problem is that there's no reflective mirror that says like, maybe that's not normal. Maybe that's a response to an emotional wound that you have.
Yeah.
What are, if anyone is looking for a psychologist, for a therapist, what are red flags of therapists?
Oh, that's a good one. Of course, anyone who would overstep your boundaries. I think another one is if they're very much just focused on the finances of things. I think these are very much red flags. When the red flags it's a very individual thing. I think the most important thing is that you feel safe. If you have a feeling of uncomfortableness around a therapist, a coach, anyone who works in the field, can be also a doctor, trust your intuition, because the most important thing is on any work that you do, if you do not hold a level of trust where you can build a form of connection with someone, that in itself is a red flag. That is for you, because you can only do the healing work and be honest, truthful in these conversations and get also the most out of it if you feel safe or feel there's an opportunity to build a bridge with that person. I think that's very important. And that no one is there to interfere also with your personal life, or someone who is close to your network, who is friends with your friends. Not necessarily a red flag, but wherever you feel like you cannot be 100% yourself and you have to hide parts of yourself or lie to your therapist, these are red flags for yourself that this is not your go-to person.
I want to make this also really practical for people that listen right now for many different disciplines. And one is partners of people that went through trauma. What can a partner do to support their partner if they have a trauma?
Now, of course, it depends on what kind of trauma. But overall, I would say please avoid sentences like, relax, it's been a long time ago. Shouldn't you be over it by now? These sort of dismissing comments, or the ones where everything is going to be all right. People struggle with this. Similarly to, you are so strong. I think most people who have been through trauma, first of all, you are strong, given fact, because you're still here. You've navigated and lived through it. But we don't want to hear this. We don't want to hear another time like, yeah, you are strong, because it's not necessarily a compliment. It is like, yeah, we had to be strong. And that makes it feel actually disconnecting and somehow also isolating, because you feel like, oh yeah, I know, I still have to be strong. It almost puts more pressure on. I cannot just be. And it's not about weakness. It's about sometimes you don't want to fly anymore. You want to just drop the wings and, fall into your nest and just, rest there. And when you're hearing phrases like, oh, you're so strong, you feel like you have to keep going, fly, get things done. And we don't want to hear that. So that's very important, of things you shouldn't say. My personal and professional take on what can you do is just listen. Just be there and listen properly. I think someone who really listens has also follow-up questions and is maybe interested in the deeper emotions of their partner. They want to know about the trauma. They're not running away from it. They're not cringing over it. They're not judging it. Listening it to what happened, or being curious and just sometimes just sitting by that person next to them, giving them the shoulder, the support they would have needed. It's all it takes. You don't need to find a solution for them. You don't need to give a piece of advice. I think that's also the pressure that sometimes a partner feels on. It's like, I want to save them. I want to give them advice, the solution. No, just be there. And with open eyes, a hug, warmth, that's sometimes all that matters. And acknowledging. And that's the hardest thing, because people with trauma sometimes struggle themselves acknowledging their pain. And just acknowledging like, whoa, this must have been a lot for you, and I'm sorry you had to go through this. But acknowledging and confirming that it's been a lot. That is such a relief sometimes. Like, finally someone allows me also just to be and be vulnerable or exhausted, and there's no pressure on it. So no pressure, listening, properly listening.
Is it the responsibility of the partner to also start the kind of awareness of certain maybe emotional responses or trauma responses? Like if someone would always react in a certain way, is this then like a responsibility of the partner to say like, I mean, you should not say you always react this way or you always do that. I think that's a couple therapy 101. But is that also then something that they should bring to the surface to kind of reflect, or is this more something that is up to the person that went through the experience to start their own journey?
I think it's a both-way thing. First of all, a partner in both ways should never be responsible or made to feel responsible fully for the other one. Of course, you're together, and yes, you have impact on each other, and yes, being together and loving and caring means also I care about your emotions, you care about mine, and I'm trying not to hurt you by learning about your wounds, by understanding how you navigate things in life, what triggers you, and listening and feeling is a very important element, but we cannot give the responsibility to our partners. You can create as a partner a boundary. And a boundary means like, hey, the way that you speak with me, it doesn't make me feel great. It triggers me, it hurts me. And if I care, and that's the other side of, that's why it's about communication, a level of care, a level of empathy. If I care enough about you and you say, hey, you're hurt, then I'm listening. And I'm trying to, within myself, also within what's possible for me and also within my boundaries, what can I do that we can come to a middle ground. But it's never one person's responsibility because that's way too much to carry. And that creates a disbalance. It creates an sort of feeling again of powerlessness in one person or overwhelm in one person. And that's not healthy, I think, in loving relationships. It's about being together and trying to be understanding and learning with and from each other. And listening and caring enough that if I care enough, then I will try not to hurt you. But it means I need to understand your boundaries or what you need from me, but vice versa.
Yeah, because I find this sometimes like quite difficult, right? In relationships or in romantic relationships, that you sometimes see someone goes through something, but you don't have the tools and the knowledge and the skills to also kind of maybe steer a conversation, to open up a conversation. So I think that your tips of, I think creating that safe space for someone to lean on, to listen, to kind of at least build a foundation for the person to open up and to give her the chance or him the chance to do it. But I think in the end, it still comes down to the other person, right? To open up about it. And
it requires, and that's the hardest part and also very triggering one, two people to be vulnerable together. And that means I communicate that something did hurt me or I'm not comfortable with. And I tell you also what it does to me emotionally. But then you explain that also to me, like, oh, because we are together in experience. And like, did not like, I don't know, the question you've asked me, it triggered me and made me feel anxious or defensive. But it starts all with first, I need to understand actually myself, mapping out my internal world so I can translate and explain to you what happens here, and creates a total different communication also in romantic relationships, which are most of the time the most triggering ones when you deal with unresolved trauma.
So then it has to do a lot with like inner safety, right? So you first have to build the inner safety for yourself, and then, or like kind of like your inner, like your boundaries, and then basically you're only able to reflect them to the outside. If people are listening right now that maybe have not defined that for themselves, what can they do to map this out, like those kind of maybe that inner safety circle?
Well, inner safety for me is emotional feeling connected to yourself. It's also emotional intimacy, but it can also be with yourself, but also with others. It's nervous system safety. It's understanding what's going on inside of you. So it's self-awareness, but it's simple practices of every so often I'm going to literally sit down and I'm going to do simple things like a body scan with my eyes closed. I'm going inward. I'm doing simple breath work. It doesn't need to be complicated holotropic breathing. It can be just, I'm going to check in with my heart. I'm going to check in, where do I hold tension here? Where's my stress? What's going on? But that inward practice that a lot of people out there, basically give you the practices tools also for free on YouTube everywhere. We don't use it because it's so simple, yet so difficult to make it a normal habit to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes in a day and check inward. Slow down consciously. Because slowing down and, let's say, sitting somewhere without doing anything, without being productive, if you have unresolved traumas, it brings up uncomfortableness, restlessness, wanting to get up, your mind telling you, get to going, do something. No. Really consciously feeling your feelings is slowing down, practicing feeling what's going on inside of you, closing your eyes, simply breathe in, breathe out. What's going on? That's the simplest practice for free. If you do that for a month, you will already have a totally different feeling within yourself. You notice more intuitive boundaries, things that don't sit right with you, because boundaries speak from your body, from your nervous system, not necessarily from your mind.
Really nice. We talked a lot about emotional wounds I learned, not trauma.
Achieved my goal.
Exactly. I want to talk quickly before we end the podcast also about the aspirational, the positive side. What happens after? What have you seen in your experience and in your work as a psychologist in the past years? Like, what happens with people's identity once they do go through this experience, through healing, through repetition, through a lot of hurtful things?
The most beautiful things, Marcus, I've seen and witnessed, and that's actually another reason why I love what I'm doing and why I keep encouraging people so much and so passionately. Because yes, it sounds like doom and gloom, heavy work, but you're doing this work for yourself. And you're doing something that's long lasting. And if you have afterwards the life that you maybe always dreamt of, and it sounds like a bit like, oh my God, she's like a manifestation coach. Cannot be true. I've seen people literally turn their life around and lived a life full of happiness, more loving, more kind, more fulfilling. That is really worth living through. I can speak of my own experience. I would have never imagined my life to be this way. And I experience so much gratefulness and excitement for the day that in my toughest moments, I never ever believed and thought this would be possible, that I would be excited about another day of daily life, which I'm grateful for because it doesn't feel like a daily life at all. But if you had told me this at the beginning, I would have said like, sorry, you're crazy. This was never going to happen. I will never speak on a camera. I could not even imagine. That's what trauma does. Trauma limits you, keeps you in a certain belief that's possible for you, or some people don't even experience that any future is possible for them. And what healing does for you is a very different one, and not something based on BS. No, everything is possible because you learn to master yourself within, and suddenly you're navigating through fear, and fear is what holds you back in life. And once you learned to live with and through fear, it becomes wonderful, it becomes magical, and that's what healing really is.
That's beautiful. One central part of what we talked about is kind of shame. Like that was really, I think, the part that stuck with me the most. If someone is feeling broken, ashamed, like right now, what would you say to this person?
I want to be very conscious what I say, because I really don't like that phrase, you're not broken. Because the truth is, people in that moment generally feel that way. And saying, oh, you're not broken, it's just, it sounds and it feels also just another phrase they cannot believe. I think the most important thing that I would like to say is the version and everything that you're feeling right now, I believe you. I believe that you exactly feel this, and this is how life looks like for you now. And I'm only asking you for one glimpse, a piece of trust in what I'm saying right now, and that you believe my words, not based on a textbook, but based on what I've witnessed. That feeling that you're feeling right now is not you. It's your traumas, and they're valid, and they're speaking out loud. But you have now the opportunity to turn this around and go on your journey, and for once, prioritize yourself. And then you will see the magic unfold because you deserve it.
Wow. I think there's not many better ways to end this episode. Caroline, thank you so much for being so open with your own wounds, with sharing so much about this topic that you're so passionate about, and that's really beautiful to see. And also spreading so much awareness because, you have big channels, but you don't use them for any weird things. You really use them for good, and that's very beautiful to see. Caroline has a podcast as well, Real, Raw, and Authentic. Yeah. You can find her on Instagram, Caroline Middelsdorf. Everything will be, of course, also linked in the show description. And again, thank you so much for coming on. And we hear each other see each other hopefully another time on the podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for having me.
And for you, it's now time to subscribe to the 301 podcast if you want more amazing guests like Caroline. There's still over 80% of people not subscribed to the 301 podcast that are watching right now. So go like and subscribe, and we see each other in another episode of the 301 podcast very soon.